Zara never fit in with her family. While everyone else on the planet Kepler had shiny blue-silver skin that looked like polished metal, hers was almost see-through, like frosted glass. Her relatives could talk to each other without saying a word, just by thinking their thoughts directly into each other's minds. But Zara? She had to use her voice, just like the ancient stories told of primitive beings from other worlds. Her family lived in a small community of about 50 families, all nestled in the shadow of the Great Crystal Mountains. These weren't ordinary crystals. They glowed with a soft purple light and powered everything in their world. The flying vehicles, the homes that floated above the ground, even the tools they used for daily work, all ran on crystal energy. Every day, Zara would wake up before the twin suns rose and prepare for another shift in the crystal mines. The work was tough, but it was honest work that fed families and kept their civilization running. She worked alongside her father Korvax, her mother Yila, and her younger brother Kem. Even though she was different, they had always found ways to include her in their daily routines. The mines were dangerous places. Deep underground, massive crystal formations grew in caves that stretched for miles. Some crystals were as tall as trees, others as thin as pencils but packed with incredible power. The mining crews had to be careful. One wrong move could bring tons of crystal crashing down. On that terrible day, everything seemed normal at first. Zara was working in Section 7, a newer part of the mine where they had discovered some of the largest crystals anyone had ever seen. The formations were beautiful but unstable. Her family members used their special mental powers to sense when crystals were about to shift or crack. They could also use their minds to move smaller pieces of crystal without touching them. But Zara couldn't do any of that. She had to rely on her eyes, her ears, and her gut feelings. Strangely enough, this had sometimes made her better at spotting danger than her relatives. She noticed tiny changes in color, heard small sounds that others missed, felt vibrations through her feet that warned of trouble. That morning, she felt something was wrong. The crystals around her seemed to hum with a different energy than usual. She tried to warn the others, calling out with her voice since she couldn't speak into their minds. But they were focused on a particularly large crystal formation that could power their entire community for months. Then it happened. A massive crystal formation, one that had stood for thousands of years, began to crack. The sound was like thunder echoing through the caves. Everyone else immediately used their telekinetic abilities to create protective shields around themselves, invisible barriers that could deflect falling debris. Zara had no such protection. She tried to run, but the cave was collapsing too quickly. Chunks of crystal, some as big as vehicles, came crashing down. She dove behind a metal support beam, but it wasn't enough. A piece of crystal the size of a small building pinned her legs, trapping her completely. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She could feel something terrible had happened to her back, but she couldn't move to check how bad it was. She called out for help, but the rumbling of falling crystal was too loud. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The purple glow of the crystals faded as they cracked and lost their power. For 3 long days, Zara stayed trapped in that cave. She had a small water container that had survived the collapse, and she rationed it carefully. The emergency food packets in her work belt helped keep her strength up. Sometimes she heard voices in the distance, rescue teams looking for survivors. She shouted until her voice was raw, but the thick layers of crystal seemed to muffle every sound. During those 3 days, she had a lot of time to think. She wondered if her family was looking for her. She thought about all the times she had felt like an outsider, and whether anyone would really miss her if she didn't make it out. But she also thought about all the things she still wanted to do with her life. She wasn't ready to give up. When the rescue team finally reached her, she was barely conscious. They had brought special equipment that could carefully move the massive crystal pieces without causing more damage. Her father was there, and she could see the worry in his metallic-colored eyes. Her mother held back tears, and her brother looked scared but relieved. But when they lifted the crystal off her legs, everyone's expressions changed. Zara couldn't feel anything below her waist. She tried to move her feet, but nothing happened. The rescue medic, a friend of her family named Vex, examined her with a handheld scanner. The device beeped and flashed red, never a good sign. Back at the medical center, the doctors confirmed what everyone already feared. The crystal had crushed part of Zara's spine, the bundle of nerves that connected her brain to the rest of her body. Their advanced medical technology, designed specifically for their species' unique biology, couldn't help her. Her genetic makeup was too different, too unusual for their standard treatments. For a few days, her family seemed hopeful that they would find a solution. They consulted with doctors from other cities, even sent messages to healers in distant communities. But every answer was the same. There was nothing they could do. Zara would spend the rest of her life unable to walk. That's when everything changed. In their culture, physical disability wasn't just seen as unfortunate. It was considered a burden that no family should have to bear. There were old traditions, ancient customs that dictated what happened to family members who couldn't contribute to the community's survival. Her father made the decision during a private family meeting that Zara wasn't invited to. She could hear them talking in the next room, their voices low and serious. When they came to tell her what they had decided, she knew from their expressions that her life was about to change forever. The night they came for her was the darkest night of Zara's life. She had been lying in her bed staring at the ceiling when she heard the soft hum of the floating transport vehicle landing outside their home. Her father Korvax entered her room, without knocking, followed by her mother Yila and brother Kem. None of them would look directly at her. "It's time," her father said simply. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was talking about moving furniture instead of his own daughter. They had built her a crude wheelchair from salvaged metal parts. It wasn't comfortable, but it would serve its purpose for the journey ahead. As they lifted her from her bed and placed her in the chair, Zara felt her mother's hands shaking. Yila's metallic blue skin had turned pale, almost gray with stress. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. "To the scrapyard," Kem whispered, speaking aloud instead of using telepathy so she could understand. It was the first time he had directly communicated with her since the accident, the scrapyard. Every child on Kepler knew about that place. It stretched for miles beyond their settlement, filled with broken machines, crashed vehicles, and discarded technology that no longer served any purpose. It was where useless things went to rust and decay under the twin moons. The journey took over an hour. Zara sat in the back of the transport, watching the familiar sights of her home community fade away. The glowing crystal towers that powered their city became smaller and smaller until they were just tiny lights in the distance. Soon there was nothing around them but empty wasteland and the growing mountains of metal debris ahead. Her family didn't speak during the trip. The only sounds were the low humming of the transport's engine and the wind whistling through the cracks in the vehicle's hull. Zara wanted to say something, anything, to break the terrible silence. She wanted to remind them of the good times they had shared, the way Kem used to laugh at her jokes, how her mother had taught her to identify different types of crystals by their color and sound. But what was the point? They had already made their decision. The scrapyard was even more massive than Zara had imagined. Mountains of twisted metal rose up like artificial hills, creating a landscape of rust and decay that stretched to the horizon. Old mining equipment sat abandoned next to crashed transport vehicles. Broken crystal storage units leaked their remaining energy in faint dying glows. They found a spot near the center of the yard, surrounded by towering piles of junk on all sides. The transport settled down with a soft thud, kicking up clouds of metallic dust that made everyone cough. "This is it," her father announced. They lifted her wheelchair down from the transport, setting it carefully on the uneven ground between two massive piles of scrap. The wheels immediately sank into the soft dirt, making it almost impossible for her to move on her own. Her mother finally looked at her then, and Zara could see tears streaming down her face. But Yila didn't say a word. In their culture, showing too much emotion during these traditional ceremonies was considered weakness. "You have been a burden to our family for too long," her father stated, reciting words that sounded like they came From an ancient script. Your inability to contribute to our survival puts the entire community at risk. By the old customs, we return you to the elements, so that your essence may find peace. Father, please. Zara tried to reach out to him, but he stepped back. I am no longer your father, Korvax replied coldly. You are no longer our family. Her brother Kim looked like he wanted to say something. He kept opening his mouth and then closing it again. Finally, he managed to whisper, Goodbye, Zara. Then he quickly turned away and climbed back into the transport. Her mother was the last to leave. She stood there for a long moment looking at her daughter sitting alone in that wheelchair surrounded by mountains of garbage. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a small crystal pendant that had belonged to Zara's grandmother. For light in the darkness, Hila whispered, placing the pendant in Zara's lap. Then she too turned and walked away. The transport lifted off, leaving Zara completely alone in the vast scrapyard. She watched the small vehicle disappear into the night sky, its lights fading until there was nothing left but darkness and silence. For the first hour, she just sat there in shock. The reality of her situation seemed impossible to accept. Her own family had abandoned her here to die. They expected her to give up, to fade away quietly like a broken machine that no longer served any purpose. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to grow inside her. Anger. Not the screaming, raging kind of anger, but a cold, determined fury that burned steady and bright. She refused to die here like a piece of discarded junk. The first night was terrible. The temperature dropped rapidly once the twin suns disappeared below the horizon. Zara had only the thin clothes she had been wearing when they brought her here. The crystal pendant provided a tiny amount of warmth and light, but not nearly enough. Strange sounds echoed through the scrapyard. Metal creaked and groaned as it cooled in the night air. Small creatures scurried through the debris, their claws clicking on the metal surfaces. In the distance, she could hear the howl of wind through the twisted wreckage. But Zara had learned to be resourceful during her 3 days trapped in the mine. She began exploring her immediate surroundings, using her hands to pull her wheelchair forward inch by inch. The wheels got stuck constantly, but she kept pushing. Within a few hours of searching, she had found a large piece of curved metal that could serve as a windshield. She also discovered some old fabric coverings that had once protected sensitive equipment. They smelled bad and were full of holes, but they were better than nothing for staying warm. More importantly, she found water. A broken pipe from some old piece of machinery was slowly dripping, creating a small puddle in a metal container. The water tasted strange, but it was clean enough to drink. By the second day, Zara had established a routine. She would spend the morning hours exploring different areas of the scrapyard, mapping out resources and looking for useful materials. The afternoons were for building and improving her shelter. And in the evenings, when it was too dark and cold to do much else, she would plan. She wasn't just planning for survival. She was planning for escape. The scrapyard was full of discarded technology, much of it still functional. She found old communication devices, power cells that still held small charges, and navigation equipment from crashed vehicles. Most of it was damaged, but Zara had grown up working with crystal technology. She understood how energy flowed, how circuits connected, how signals traveled. If she could put together the right combination of components, maybe she could build something that would call for help. She had no idea who might be listening out there in the vast emptiness of space, but it was better than just sitting here waiting to die. The work gave her purpose, something to focus on besides the pain of her family's rejection. Every small success, getting a power cell to hold a charge, successfully connecting 2 pieces of equipment, felt like a victory against the fate they had chosen for her. 3 weeks had passed since Zara's family left her in the scrapyard. 3 weeks of surviving on rainwater and the strange glowing fungi that grew in the damp corners of the metal piles. The fungi didn't taste good, but they didn't make her sick either, and that was all that mattered. Her communication device was almost finished. She had built it from dozens of different components: a transmitter from a crashed mining vehicle, power cells from old equipment, and crystals that still held enough energy to boost the signal. The hardest part had been figuring out how to make all these different technologies work together. Every day she tested small parts of the system. A light would flicker here, a speaker would crackle there. Slowly, piece by piece, the device was coming to life. She had built it inside what used to be the cargo compartment of a large transport vehicle. The metal walls helped focus the signal and protected her work from the weather. During these weeks, Zara had learned to navigate the scrapyard better than anyone could have imagined. She had found ways to move her wheelchair over rough terrain, discovered shortcuts between the massive piles of debris, and mapped out every source of water and food in her territory. She had also learned she wasn't completely alone. Small creatures lived in the scrapyard. Not dangerous, just curious animals that had adapted to life among the metal. They reminded her of the pets some families kept back home, though these were wilder and more cautious. Sometimes they would watch her work from a safe distance, their bright eyes reflecting the light from her crystal pendant. But the loneliness was still overwhelming. At night, when the work was done, and there was nothing to distract her from her thoughts, she would remember her family. She wondered if they ever thought about her, if they felt guilty about what they had done, or if they had simply forgotten she ever existed. According to their customs, they would have held a ceremony after leaving her here. They would have burned her belongings and removed her name from their family records. As far as her community was concerned, she had died with honor, accepting her fate peacefully. They would never know about the device she was building or how hard she was fighting to survive. On the 22nd day, something amazing happened. Her communication device finally powered up completely. All the lights came on, the screens flickered to life, and the transmitter began broadcasting her carefully crafted message into space. The message was simple, but clever. Since she didn't know what other species might be out there, or what languages they spoke, she used mathematics, the one language that should be universal. She started with basic concepts: 1 + 1 = 2, the first few prime numbers, simple geometric shapes. Then she moved on to more complex ideas. She transmitted the coordinates of her location, using the position of nearby stars as reference points. She included information about her planet's orbit around their sun, the length of their days and years. Most importantly, she sent proof that her signals were coming from an intelligent being, mathematical sequences that were too complex and purposeful to be random. Every few hours, the device would repeat the entire message. Zara had programmed it to broadcast in all directions, sending her plea for help out into the vast emptiness of space. She had no idea if anyone was listening, but for the first time since the accident, she felt hope. Meanwhile, her family had moved on with their lives. They told their neighbors and friends that Zara had passed away peacefully, accepting her fate with dignity. Her mother, Yila, had taken to spending long hours in the crystal gardens, tending to the plants that grew around, their home's energy sources. Her father, Korvax, worked longer shifts in the mines as if staying busy could help him forget what he had done. Her brother, Kem, struggled the most. He was young enough to remember when Zara used to tell him stories and help him with his studies. Sometimes he would start to send her a telepathic message, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't receive thoughts like everyone else. Then he would remember she was gone, and the sadness would hit him all over again. But none of them knew that Zara's signal was traveling through space at the speed of light, racing past distant stars and through empty galaxies, carrying her message of hope to anyone who might be listening. Light years away on a research ship called the Horizon's Edge, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was working late in her laboratory. Elena was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied the possibility of life on other planets. She had dedicated her career to answering one of humanity's biggest questions: are we alone in the universe? Elena had been monitoring radio signals from space for over 10 years. Most of what she detected was just cosmic background noise, the random static that fills the emptiness between stars. Occasionally, she would pick up signals from human satellites or space stations, but she had never found anything that suggested intelligent life beyond Earth. That night, as she reviewed the data from their latest deep space scan, something unusual caught her attention. Hidden in the noise was a pattern, a repeating sequence of mathematical concepts that was far too organized to be natural. Computer, isolate and enhance signal designation Alpha 773, she commanded. The ship's artificial intelligence processed her request, filtering out the background noise and amplifying the mysterious signal. What Elena heard next made her heart race with excitement. It was definitely artificial, definitely intelligent, and definitely not human. She immediately called Captain Chen, the commander of the Horizon's Edge. Chen was an experienced explorer who had spent most of his career mapping unknown regions of space. He was cautious by nature, but he also understood the historic significance of what Elena might have discovered. "Are you absolutely certain this isn't coming from one of our own ships, Zhao?" he asked, studying the data on Elena's screen. "I've checked everything, Captain. This signal is originating from the Kepler 442 system, over 30 light-years from the nearest human colony. And look at this mathematical progression. It's using concepts and reference points that no human would include." The signal included star charts that were oriented from a completely different perspective than anything humans would create. It referenced constellations and cosmic landmarks that would only be visible from the Kepler system. Most convincing of all, it included what appeared to be a distress call, coordinates pointing to a specific location on the fourth planet in that system. Captain Chen made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Set course for the Kepler system," he ordered. "We're going to investigate this signal." It was a risky choice. The Horizon's Edge was on a routine survey mission, and deviating from their planned route would use up valuable fuel and supplies. If Elena was wrong about the signal, if it turned out to be some kind of natural phenomenon or equipment malfunction, Chen's career could be over. But if she was right, they were about to make first contact with an alien intelligence. The journey to Kepler 442b took several days at maximum speed. During the trip, Elena continued to monitor the signal, learning more about its source with each transmission. The mathematical concepts became more complex and sophisticated, suggesting that whoever was sending the message was highly intelligent and scientifically advanced. More importantly, there was something desperate about the signal's repetitive nature. It wasn't just a casual greeting to the cosmos. It was a plea for help from someone who was running out of time. When the human ship entered Kepler's atmosphere, Zara was working on improving her communication device. She had been adding new components she had found deeper in the scrapyard, pieces from what looked like an old weather monitoring station. These parts might help her signal reach even further into space. Then she heard something she had never heard before. A deep, thunderous roar echoed across the scrapyard, getting louder and louder. She looked up to see a massive silver object descending from the sky, unlike any vehicle from her world. This ship was sleek and smooth, with no visible crystal energy sources. Strange blue flames shot out from its bottom as it slowly settled down about 100 yards from her shelter. Zara's first instinct was to hide. What if this was some kind of military ship from another city on her planet? What if they were here? To make sure she was actually dead as her family had claimed, she quickly shut down her communication device and rolled her wheelchair behind a large pile of metal debris. From her hiding spot, she watched as a door opened in the side of the strange ship. 3 figures stepped out, but they looked nothing like anyone from her world. Their skin wasn't metallic blue. It was a pale pinkish color, almost like her own. They were taller than her people, and they moved differently as if they weren't used to the gravity on Kepler. The 3 beings wore matching white outfits with clear helmets over their heads. They carried small devices that beeped and flashed as they walked. One of them, a female with dark hair, seemed to be leading the group. She held a larger device that was pointed in Zara's direction, sweeping back and forth like it was searching for something. "The signal is definitely coming from this area," Elena said to her companions. Though Zara couldn't understand their language, life signs are weak but stable. Whatever sent that message is still alive. Captain Chen and Dr. Kim, the ship's medical officer, followed Elena as she traced the signal to its source. They had to climb over and around massive piles of discarded machinery. The scrapyard was even larger than it had appeared from space, stretching to the horizon in all directions. "This is incredible," Dr. Kim whispered, examining some of the alien technology scattered around them. "Look at these crystal formations. The energy readings are off the charts. As they got closer to Zara's location, Elena's scanner started beeping, more rapidly. There, she pointed toward a large pile of debris. Behind that crashed vehicle, the life signs are getting stronger. Zara realized she had been discovered. Her hands shook as she tried to decide what to do. These strange beings had obviously come looking for her, probably because of her signal. But were they friendly? Were they here to help, or was this some kind of trap? Elena was the first to see movement behind the wreckage. Through her scanner, she could make out a humanoid figure in what appeared to be a primitive wheelchair. The being was clearly alive but seemed frightened and trying to hide. "Hello," Elena called out in English, knowing the alien wouldn't understand but hoping her tone would sound peaceful. She slowly approached, holding her hands out to show she wasn't carrying any weapons. Zara saw the female being walking toward her with her hands raised. The gesture seemed friendly, but she was still terrified. These creatures could be dangerous. They could be here to capture her, to experiment on her, or worse. But she was trapped. Her wheelchair couldn't move fast enough to escape, and there was nowhere to run anyway. When Elena finally came around the pile of debris and saw Zara clearly for the first time, her heart broke. The young alien was obviously malnourished and exhausted. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and she looked like she had been surviving in this harsh environment for weeks. But her eyes were bright and intelligent, watching Elena's every move with curiosity mixed with fear. "Oh my goodness," Elena whispered to her teammates, "she's just a child." Zara wasn't actually a child by her species standards. She was 17, which was considered adult age. But to the humans, she looked incredibly young and vulnerable. Elena knelt down slowly, making herself less threatening by getting to Zara's eye level. "We're here to help," Elena said softly, even though she knew Zara couldn't understand the words. Instead, she tried to communicate through gestures. She pointed to herself, then to her teammates, then made peaceful hand signals. Zara watched these gestures carefully. The female being seemed to be trying to tell her something important. She pointed to herself and said a sound that might have been her name, Elena. Then she pointed to Zara and raised her eyebrows questioningly. Understanding the gesture, Zara pointed to herself and said clearly, "Zara." Elena smiled. The first smile Zara had seen in weeks. "Zara," Elena repeated, pronouncing it carefully. Then she pointed to the sky and made a gesture like something falling down. She was asking how Zara had ended up here. This was harder to explain through gestures, but Zara was determined to try. She had been alone for so long, and these beings seemed genuinely interested in helping her. She began to draw pictures in the dirt with her finger. First, she drew simple figures representing her family, herself, her parents, and her brother. Elena and her team watched intently as Zara's story unfolded in the dirt. She drew the mine where she used to work, the accident that had injured her, and finally the moment when her family brought her to the scrapyard and left her alone. When Zara finished her drawings, she looked up at the three humans with tears in her eyes. Even though they came from different worlds and spoke different languages, the story of abandonment and survival was something they could all understand. Dr. Kim examined Zara's paralyzed legs with a handheld medical scanner. The device couldn't give detailed information about alien physiology, but it was clear that she had suffered severe spinal damage. More importantly, the scanner showed that she was severely dehydrated and malnourished. "We need to get her medical attention immediately," Dr. Kim told Captain Chen. But Chen was struggling with the implications of what they had discovered. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be handled carefully, with proper protocols and diplomatic procedures. They weren't supposed to interfere with alien civilizations, especially not by rescuing individuals from their own people. "What if this is some kind of cultural practice we don't understand?" Chen asked. "What if removing her from this place violates their customs or laws?" Elena stood up, her expression firm and determined. "Captain, look at her. She's been abandoned here to die. She built a communication device from scraps and called out to the universe for help. She chose to contact us. We can't just leave her here." Zara sensed the tension in their discussion. Even though she couldn't understand their words, she could see that they were arguing about something related to her. The male leader seemed hesitant, while the female who had first approached her was speaking passionately, gesturing toward Zara repeatedly. In desperation, Zara began to work on her communication device again. She managed to power it up and show the humans the mathematical sequences she had been broadcasting. She demonstrated how she had built the device from salvaged parts, how she had survived for weeks on her own, and how desperately she wanted to escape this place. "She's incredibly intelligent," Elena pointed out to Chen. "Look at what she's accomplished with these primitive materials. She's not just a victim, she's a survivor who actively sought our help." Captain Chen looked at Zara, sitting in her makeshift wheelchair surrounded by the evidence of her incredible resourcefulness and determination. He thought about the signal that had brought them here, a mathematical plea for help that had traveled across 30 light-years of space. Finally, he made his decision. "We're taking her with us." Bringing Zara aboard the human ship was like entering a completely different world. Everything was clean and bright, with soft white lights that didn't flicker like the crystal lamp she was used to. The walls were smooth metal, and the floors had a strange bouncy material that made movement quieter and more comfortable. Dr. Kim immediately took Zara to the ship's medical bay, a room filled with devices she had never seen before. The humans were incredibly gentle as they helped her onto an examination table. They used soft cloths and warm water to clean her wounds, and gave her the first real meal she had eaten in weeks. The food was strange, but delicious. Instead of the bitter fungi and recycled water she had been surviving on, they gave her warm soup, fresh bread, and clean drinking water that tasted better than anything from her home planet. Elena stayed with her during the examination, continuing to communicate through gestures and simple drawings. Over the next few days, something amazing happened. Zara began to understand some of their language. She was incredibly quick at learning, picking up words and phrases faster than anyone had expected. Water, food, sleep, safe. These basic concepts became the foundation of their communication. Elena spent hours with her each day, teaching her English while learning about Zara's world in return. They developed a system using drawings, hand gestures, and simple words that allowed them to share increasingly complex ideas. "Family," Elena said one day, showing Zara a photograph of her parents back on Earth. Zara looked at the picture for a long time, then shook her head sadly. "No family," she said in careful English. "Family leave Zara. Family say Zara broken." Elena's heart ached as she began to understand the full tragedy of what had happened to this remarkable young woman. Zara's own people had abandoned her simply because she was different, because an accident had left her unable to walk. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim was working around the clock to understand Zara's physiology well enough to help her. To their amazement, her basic biology was similar enough to humans that their medical equipment could monitor her vital signs and provide supportive care. Her blood was a different color, and her internal organs were arranged slightly differently, but the fundamental principles were the same. "It's incredible," Kim explained to Captain Chen. "It's like finding a distant cousin in the family tree of life. We're different species from different worlds, but we share enough common ground that I can actually treat her injuries." More importantly, Zara was healing emotionally as well as physically. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who saw her intelligence and determination instead of focusing on her disability. The humans adapted their ship to accommodate her wheelchair, creating ramps and modifying doorways so she could move around freely. She became fascinated by human technology, which worked on completely different principles than the crystal-powered devices of her homeworld. Elena taught her about electricity, computers, and space travel. In return, Zara explained the energy properties of the crystals that powered her civilization. "Your people could learn much from Zara's knowledge," Elena told Captain Chen, "and she could learn from us. This is exactly the kind of peaceful exchange that first contact should involve." But their peaceful mission was about to face a serious challenge. 3 weeks after rescuing Zara, the Horizon's Edge received a communication from the planet they had left behind. It was an official message from Zara's people, transmitted through the same frequencies she had used to call for help. Captain Chen called Elena and Dr. Kim to the bridge to hear the message. A translation program had managed to decode most of it, and the content was disturbing. They're demanding that we return their deceased family member immediately, Chen summarized. They claim we have violated their customs by disturbing her final resting place. They're threatening to report this as kidnapping to something called the Planetary Council. Elena was outraged. Kidnapping? She called us for help. She wanted to be rescued. But the message from Kepler revealed something even more troubling. Zara's family had told their entire community that she had died peacefully in the scrapyard, accepting her fate according to their ancient traditions. They had held funeral ceremonies and officially removed her from all family records. As far as their society was concerned, she was already dead. When Elena translated this information for Zara, her reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of crying or getting angry, Zara sat quietly for a long moment, then looked up with the expression of calm determination. Family say Zara dead, she said in her improving English. Then Zara is dead to family too. Zara choose new family now. She gestured around the ship at Elena, Dr. Kim, Captain Chen, and the rest of the crew who had welcomed her aboard. This is Zara's family now. Captain Chen faced a difficult decision. Returning Zara to her planet would essentially be sending her back to die in the scrapyard, but keeping her could create diplomatic problems with an entire alien civilization. The protocols for first contact had never covered a situation like this. Elena made an impassioned argument during the senior staff meeting. She's not just a victim we rescued, she pointed out. In the few weeks she's been with us, she's already contributed more to our understanding of alien technology than years of remote observation could have achieved. She's brilliant, resourceful, and eager to learn. Dr. Kim supported Elena's position. From a medical standpoint, returning her to that environment would be essentially murder. She was dying when we found her. Here, she's thriving. Finally, Captain Chen made a decision that would change the course of interstellar relations forever. He sent a reply to Kepler 442b, stating that according to their records, they had found no living beings in the scrapyard, only some interesting technological artifacts that they were studying. It wasn't exactly a lie. According to Zara's own people, she was officially dead. They were simply choosing not to contradict that official position. The journey back to Earth took several months. During that time, Zara learned to speak English fluently and began studying human science and culture. She was particularly fascinated by the concept of individual rights and freedoms, which were foreign ideas in her home society. She also began working with Elena to develop the first universal translator programs, using her knowledge of both human and Kepler languages. Her unique perspective, as someone who had been rejected by her own species, gave her insights into communication and cultural differences that proved invaluable. When they finally reached Earth, Zara became the first official alien refugee in human history. The governments of Earth were initially uncertain about how to handle her case, but her obvious intelligence and peaceful nature quickly won over even the most skeptical officials. Elena became her official guardian and mentor, helping her navigate human society while continuing their scientific collaboration. They established the first Center for Interspecies Relations, with Zara serving as both a researcher and a living ambassador between worlds. Years passed, and Zara thrived in ways her birth family could never have imagined. She earned advanced degrees in both human science and xenobiology. She became fluent in 6 human languages and helped develop communication protocols for contact with other alien species they encountered. She never forgot where she came from, but she rarely spoke about her family's abandonment. When younger researchers asked about her past, she would simply say, "Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born with." The irony wasn't lost on anyone when, 15 years later, ships from Kepler 442b arrived, at Earth seeking trade agreements and cultural exchange. The delegation was shocked to discover that their dead family member was now serving as Earth's chief ambassador for interspecies relations. Zara met with them professionally but politely, declined their invitation to return home as an honored representative. She had found her place in the universe, not in the world that had rejected her, but among the stars with the family that had chosen to save her. In her office at the Center for Interspecies Relations, she kept a small piece of crystal from the communication device she had built in the scrapyard, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that even in the darkest places, hope can survive and grow into something beautiful.